you very much. Thanks to the organizers. Also, thanks for giving me such a challenging title and to challenging me to give you the advice how to succeed publishing in top journals in 15 minutes. But I really tried my best to meet this challenge. Okay, well, as you said, the reason why I'm standing here is because I've been engaged in the work of the journal Biochemia Medica for 13 years, and I've been in several positions as assistant editor and then editor-in-chief, and really during that time, throughout those years, I've rejected many more papers than I have accepted. And I always felt sorry about it, really, when I had to do it. And this is why I want to help you to improve your writing skills and to avoid getting your papers rejected. There are some fantastic resources, and I really would like to recommend to all of you this book, especially to young ones. It's a very simple book with a lot of very practical tips for you to master the writing skills. And you can even find a free PDF on the website. There are fantastic, AACC Clinical Chemistry Guide is also a fantastic resource. And there are some great papers, and I'd like to recommend two of them, which are not only very informative, but also very amusing. Like this one, you know, what do you have to do to have your paper rejected? And there's another one, and I really recommend to you to read those papers because you will learn a lot, but you will also be amused. So again, how to get your paper rejected. And I will be referencing to another paper of this kind later during my lecture. So why do papers get rejected? Why do papers get rejected? Well, of course, there are reasons such as, you know, bad study. If you have a bad study, bad design, bad methodology, then you can do nothing about it. And actually, if you're young, then this is not your responsibility, it's the responsibility of your mentor. And I'm not going to talk about this, but even if you have the best study in the world, still, your paper can be rejected due to some trivial reasons, such as, you know, your paper is out of scope, there is a lack of novelty, and due to the style problems. And I'm going to focus on these problems and try to give you some useful tips throughout the following 10 or so minutes. So tip number one from me, make sure that the topic of your study is within the scope of the journal. This is a very, very common mistake due to which I had to reject a lot of papers. So if you are submitting a paper, please make sure that the paper is within the scope of the journal that you are submitting your paper to. So if you have, for example, a laboratory paper, do not submit it to a clinical journal. If you have a paper on animal models, don't submit it to a journal that doesn't publish papers with animal models. If you have, for example, there are a lot of papers that journals that don't publish genetic association studies. There are journals that don't publish case reports. So please make sure to go to the journal website, and every journal has some advice under the probably section about the journal, where the journal defines the categories that fit into the scope of the journal. The second error that you can make is that your study doesn't have any novelty. So my tip to you would be, make sure that you ask a question which has not been already addressed. So for example, if you want to publish a paper that has studied stability of glucose in Griner FC mixed tubes, then you have to do a thorough literature search, and if you do it and you find 4 papers that had studied already the same thing, don't even think about writing that paper and submitting it to journal, because editors are well aware of all those studies and they will immediately reject it. So my advice to you would be, even before you think of writing a paper, make a good literature search. Be sure that you are aware of everything that has been published so far on that topic. So learn what is already known. Even more important, this is a trick. Learn what is not known, because this is the gap that your paper can fill. So your paper actually needs to fill the gaps in the current knowledge. So try to see what is not known about the topic, and then this is where your study will fit. So if you can tick positive to those 2 questions, then you're free to continue and to write the paper and to submit it. So is there any novelty in your paper? If you can say yes, then you're okay. Is there any added value that your study brings? If you can say yes to those 2 questions, then you're okay, and there is a chance that your paper will be accepted. Style, very common problem. and very common reason for papers to be rejected. Even though they are nice studies, well designed, but then you have a problem with the style of your manuscript and your paper will be rejected. So all papers have a very common structure, and we all know it: title, abstract, introduction, etc. But journals differ in their requirements for the way different sections are written. For example, some journals would have a limitation to the number of words in title or the number of words in abstract, 250, 350. The abstracts could be structured or not structured. Methods could have some defined sections within the method section, number of references, style of references, etc., etc. So before even thinking about writing a paper, please go to the journal website and read instructions to authors. And unfortunately, really too few authors do this. And it's very insulting and impolite for an editor to receive a paper and to realize that the paper has not been written in accordance with the journal style. So before you sit down and try and start to write a paper, please read instructions to authors. Title, again, very, very important. My tip to you would be: make sure your title is informative and intriguing. And there is a lot we can learn from journalists, because they really make their titles catchy. So the moment you read a title, you feel, I want to read this paper. So try to think about your study and your title the same way as journalists do. Title determines whether your paper will be read. It's the same as the newspapers. If you browse the newspapers and you see a boring title, you will not read the article, right? So the title very often is the first thing that editors read, and depending on the title, they will think, will I read it immediately? Is it interesting? Will I read it later? Will I never read it because I think it's a boring study, and I will reject it. So just because of the title, you may get your paper rejected. It's also the first what readers read, and you have a chance to be that your paper will be missed and nobody will read it just because you made a mistake and you didn't put enough effort to write or to construct a good title. So a good title is the one that is easy to understand, easy, simple, be easy. It provokes curiosity. Think about journalists. It says what the paper is about, but doesn't explain everything what was done. And I'll give an example for that. Very, very important. Be short. And I will emphasize this many times throughout this lecture. Be short. Keep it as short as possible. The simpler, the better. So, is this a good title? The case-controlled genetic association study of hereditary protein C deficiency caused by the factor V Leiden mutation in the protein C, blah, blah, blah. It's boring. It's too long and it's boring. So what about this? Is this better? Factor V Leiden mutation as a thrombophilic risk factor after hip arthroplasty. Okay, you know what the paper is about. You know what the study is about. But this one is even better. And think about journalists. This one is sketchy. Is factor V Leiden mutation a thrombophilic factor after hip arthroplasty? So try to think about, how to engage readers and editors to read your paper. Abstract. Abstract is the most critical part of your paper, and abstract is often the only part people will read, right? It's also like something that is going to be the basis on which your work is going to be judged by the authors, readers, but also judged by the editors. So really put an effort. You really need to put some decent amount of effort into creating your abstract. Abstract, again, should be short, very concise, informative, and interesting. It actually should be a digest of the whole paper. So you really need to put a lot of effort to put everything there is in your study into the paper. Your hypothesis, your aims, the methods, the results, the key conclusions, right? And it should stand alone. Try to think of the abstract as the paper in a little format. So if you can read the abstract and understand everything that has been done, then you have done a good job. And it's also helpful to those who have no access to full text. So try really to think about how to produce a good abstract. Tip number 5, the aim of introduction. The aim of introduction, young authors very often have a lot of troubles writing a good introduction. It's maybe because we don't understand the aim. What is the aim of introduction? The aim of introduction is to convince readers of the importance of your study. The aim of introduction is to sell your study. It's the selling point. You need to write the introductions in such a way so that the one who reads it thinks, oh my God, this is an excellent study. This is a fantastic question. How did I not come to that, right? So you really need to think of how to make somebody understand the importance of your study. So my advice would be to include in your abstract information about why you have done this study. Make sure to state what is already known, and even more important, and I've emphasized it already, what is not known. You have to show the reader, this is known, but this is not known, and this is a knowledge gap, and I'm going to fill this knowledge gap, right? So try to emphasize what is your work important, what is your work contributing, and what is the added value of your work. Make it interesting, and again, keep it short. Nobody wants to read long articles, and nobody wants to read long introductions. So keep it as short as possible, and say what you have to say with as few words as possible. And let it sound important, but please do not exaggerate. Do not forget to state the aims and hypotheses at the end of your abstract. This is very often forgotten. So at the end of the abstract, please state what is your hypothesis and what are you trying to do. And this is, again, one very funny paper, and I recommend it to all of you to read it. So how to ensure that your paper is rejected by the statistical reviewer. And if you want to make sure that your paper is rejected, then you should ensure no clear aim or study hypothesis is stated in the introduction. So my advice to you for a good introduction would be something like this. There is a biomarker so-so, and this biomarker is important for disease so-and-so. There is an increasing prevalence of disease so-and-so in children, so you're trying to build up, you're trying to sell a story, build up a problem. There is an instrument, so-and-so, and the instrument is used to quantify the biomarker, so-and-so. Its performance has already been reported, so say what is already known. We know the performance of the instrument. There are reference intervals in adults, but there are no data for children. This is the knowledge gap. There are no data for children. Biomarker, so-so, is age-dependent. So we hypothesize, never forget the hypothesis, we hypothesize that reference intervals in children will be different from adults. And this is why we did this study to produce reference intervals for biomarkers so-and-so in children. So this would be like an algorithm to produce a good introduction. Materials and methods, tip number 7. Make sure that your materials and methods are informative. And basically it's very simple. Materials and methods actually serve for you to explain how did you do your study, how did you do that. And if you did it right, then a qualified reader should be able to repeat the work in the same way. So it's like a cookbook, and you really need to provide enough detail so that anybody who wants can repeat your study in the exactly same way. Tip number 8, make sure readers understand your results. Results are quite simple, and there are not so many errors in results, but still sometimes there are some classical errors. In results, you have the text, you have tables, and you have graphs. Tables summarize the evidence, and figures are the ones that highlight the most important findings. Make sure that tables and figures are self-explanatory. And the easy way to do that is to make a table, make a figure, and give it to a colleague. If your colleague needs your explanation to tell him, what is on the graph, then the graph is not good. Graph needs to be, self-explanatory without any further explanation. My advice to you, there are a lot of tips, and I recommend, again, this book, so you can go and read it in details, but the key messages for really good results would be concise, again, be short, emphasize the important findings, do not repeat information provided in tables. What you have put in the tables, don't repeat in the text, right? And importantly, do not interpret results in the results section. You will have the opportunity to do that in the discussion. And there are a number of fantastic resources to not to make any error in the results section. I'll just recommend 2 papers. One is for data presentation, published in Biochemia Medica, and the other one is for graphical presentation. And there are a lot of do's and don'ts, so what you should do and what you shouldn't do when you're presenting your results. Tip number 9, discussion. Make sure your discussion is well structured and concise. The purpose of discussion is to explain what your findings mean to the field. So what is the meaning of your results, right? So a good discussion would start with restating your hypothesis. This was our hypothesis. State the key findings of the study. Relate your findings to the existing knowledge. Say what it means in terms of other studies. Say what is the novelty of your work. Discuss weaknesses and limitations. Every study has its weaknesses, so be fair and honest and say what are the weaknesses of your approach. Do not repeat results in the discussion session. Say what it means for the practice. Say what future studies need to be done, and then make a good conclusion. And finally, tip number 10, do not forget to always KISS, meaning keep it short and simple. Thank you.